Okay, so in today's video, what I want to do is give you guys a really crude and high-level introduction to the topic of flooding from a town planner's perspective. So, under City Plan 2014, aka the planning scheme, aka the rule book that we operate under, flooding is considered under two different overlays. First and foremost, we've got the flood overlay, and then second, we've got the coastal hazard overlay. Now, within the flood overlay, there is three separate subcategories. We've got the overland flow, creek and waterway, and then Brisbane River. Now, each one of those different subcategories, and then the coastal hazard overlay, represents a different source of flooding. So, bear with me here. As the rainwater hits the ground, it forms little channels that cause flooding through individual properties as they work their way down to the creeks and waterways. Then, once the water hits those creeks and waterways from the various different overland flow paths, it backs up and it breaks its banks and affects the low-lying properties around the creeks and waterways. That is creek and waterway flooding. You get where I'm kind of going here. The creeks and waterways flow down to the Brisbane River. The Brisbane River backs up, breaks its banks, and affects or floods the surrounding low-lying properties. And then it goes down into the Moreton Bay. And then when we have king tides and things like that, it backs up across the low-lying areas through Sandgate, Shorncliffe, Wynnum, all of those sort of locations. Now, within each of these overlays, Council has, in super duper simple terms, three key things that they're looking at or focusing on when it comes to housing applications. First and foremost, personal and property damage. So reducing the risk to a reasonable or kind of, let's just say, accepted level when it comes to people's lives, their property, their goods, all of that sort of stuff. Number two, trying to improve our post-flood recovery efforts and trying to make them as efficient as possible, trying to get us up and running as quickly as possible after a flood event. And then last but not least, making sure that any work we do on one property does not redirect or increase the flow of water through a neighbour's property. Now, the intensity of the requirements, let's just say, varies depending on the flood source. So let's say, for example, you're talking about the coastal hazard overlay, which again is king tide type related, or Brisbane River. You have plenty, in relative terms, plenty of warning when those things are going to hit. Like I remember back to 2011, I was living in Southbank, South Brisbane, that kind of area, and we were going to be inundated. We had days and days of warning. Like I remember looking outside a day like today, I was like, beautiful sunny sky, and apparently in a day and a half we're going to be underwater. This just blows my mind. I can't believe it. But yet we had plenty of time to clear out our garage, to come up with alternate accommodation, to pack our bags, to move out, all of that sort of stuff. However, overland flow path and to a degree creeks and waterways, they hit almost instantly. The minute it starts raining, if it's a really intense rain event, you're going to have flooding almost instantly through those properties. So you don't get the warning time, the ability to move your goods, get yourself out of risk, out of harm's way, all of that sort of stuff. So when it comes to, let's say, for example, the non-habitable floor level requirements, which is all focused on personal and property damage at the core, the non-habitable requirement for Brisbane River is lower than it is for overland flow path, because again, you do not have the warning time to be able to get your property and your goods out to safely evacuate, all of that sort of stuff. Brisbane River, they can relax it a little bit more. Or when it comes to undercroft requirements, again, overland flow, there's an undercroft requirement there, either 1.5 or 2.5 metres, depending on the velocity of water and all of that sort of stuff. Brisbane River, coastal hazard, you don't have that sort of requirement. So yeah, the requirements at its sort of core, at a general level, there's three key principles that apply across the board, but the level of requirements varies depending on the source of flooding, the type of flooding, all of that sort of stuff. Okay, so someone walking past my car looking at me at the moment. We're going to keep going. So the final thing I wanted to say was basically just because you comply with Council's requirements does not mean there is zero risk. So if you design a proposal to tick all of Council's boxes, it does not mean that will never be affected by flooding. There is no risk to personal property damage, all of that sort of stuff. The 1% AEP, 2% AEP, all of those levels that we work off, the requirements within those codes are just based on a globally accepted risk level. So Council, if they wanted to ensure that everyone was absolutely de-risked, there was no risk to personal property damage, all of that sort of stuff, they'd have to say build 100 metres off the ground or something crazy. I'm obviously exaggerating here, but you'd have to be well and truly above the ground level across the whole city. We'd end up with spaceships everywhere. It's just not a good design outcome. It's got to be a bit of a balancing act there. So the levels that they've come up with are just a reasonable expected, it covers most people. I'm not going to put a percentage on it. Let's just say it covers the majority of people in the majority of rain events. It's never going to ensure that everyone is going to be de-risked. So you need to keep that in mind. So when designing a proposal, had this on a site in Petrie Terrace the other day, I was saying to a client, it's one thing to comply with Council's requirements, but if you look at the Category 5 mapping for Brisbane River, there's no requirements associated with that type of flooding. that is more there to try and build awareness, manage expectations around where the water could go in or will go in the future once we account for global warming, all of that sort of different flood events, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, you can sit here and do a happy dance and go, great, I don't have any council requirements to consider, but you also need to take a step back and go, hold on a sec, if we're pumping a bucket load of money, watch my language here, pumping a bucket load of money into this house renovation, we don't just want to keep one eye on council's rules, we also want to make sure that we're reducing the risk to ourselves, our assets in the future, and maybe we want to build a little bit higher. Maybe we want to look at some resilient materials down the bottom, etc., etc. Anyway, I think that covers off everything I want to talk about today. Nice, quick, rapid-fire introduction to all things flooding within Brisbane. Hopefully next week I can get around to answering another question that came up this week, which was, what's the difference between the flood awareness mapping and the interactive mapping for the flood overlay and the coastal hazard overlay and all that sort of stuff? Unfortunately, it's a bit too much to talk about today, so I'll defer that to next week. As I always like to say, until next time, thanks for watching.
For all you red tape lovers out there, I have one thing to say. Well, no, actually, I've got three. Number one, the advice provided in these videos is general in nature. It's not site-specific. You would be a silly Billy to go and make financial decisions based on this advice without first checking with the town planner. Don't be a silly Billy. Number two, Brisbane town planning is in no way linked to Brisbane City Council. The views expressed in these videos are my own, not council's. So if you don't like them, blame me, not council. Number three, what was my number three? Oh yeah, the views expressed in these videos are accurate at the time of recording. If you're watching this video back 10 years from now, the views may not be so accurate. That's all. Bye.